All right, everyone, welcome back again to the God Attachment Healing Podcast. We are here talking again with Ms. Maggie McCane about communication styles and communication in general. Last time we spoke about communication in relationships and how that is experience and problem solving and communication patterns. Today, we're going to try to orient this conversation towards how we relate and connect with God and how we even communicate with God. And it's going to be a great conversation. I'm looking forward to it. I never actually thought about this, Maggie, and I know it was when we were talking, whether it be last time or just in email,
Yeah.
how we don't really think about how we communicate with God. Like I talk about the
hmm
relationship, how we experience God, feel God, think about God. But the
hmm
communication piece intrigued me when we were talking about that.
Yes.
And so I think a good place to start is, we've talked about communication, healthy communication with couples and friendships and so on. But yeah, when you think about communicating with God, like
hmm
what comes to mind?
Yeah. I mean, I think what started this conversation is like, okay, if we're thinking about and focusing our time and energy and learning on being better communicators and having healthier relationships, I mean, if we're a Christian, like God should be one of our primary relationships. And thus, we have to think about our communication patterns in that relationship as well.
Hmm.
So I think to your point, like it's interesting that our relationship with God and our communication with God would be excluded from the conversation originally that we were
Mm,
having because it is a primary relationship that we should be talking about and really working on, right? Like any good relationship, it takes time, effort, energy. And so communication is just part of growing a healthier relationship.
yeah, yeah, no, I agree. And I keep on thinking about maybe communication principles that you've used in your practice or that you've used to work with couples and
hmm
see if there's any actual connection between those and how we communicate with God.
hmm
One of the things that comes to mind is
hmm
how in communication it's a two-way street, right? It's not just one person talking, it's a communication that each person is sharing, right?
Yes,
But can you share maybe a principle or two so this is one of them maybe where communication is a two-way street. So not
totally.
only am I sharing with God what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, what I'm experiencing, but the other side of that is also, okay, what is God saying to me as I'm sharing these things with him, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
And like, are we giving God the time and space to answer? I think this is a topic that a lot of Christians really do struggle with is like we're very well versed and well practiced in going to God with our worries, our complaints, our asks, right? Like we can do
Hmm.
that all day long of like, please God or why God. But then do we stop and let him answer and like let him stir in our spirit? Or read the word and let words illuminate to us or verses illuminate to us and
Mm.
seek the answer. I think a lot of us struggle with this. And so I think it's a really important principle, again, in life, but in our relationship with God. And then the other principle that really comes to mind too is when we're thinking about communication in our relationships, it requires honesty. And how many
Mm.
of us hide things, or at least we think we're hiding things from God, of like, I don't bring this up in my prayer time. I don't surrender this to God. I don't gnaw on this and work through this with the Lord. I just keep this to myself. That's not going to create a healthy relationship with God, and it's not going to create a healthy relationship, otherwise with our partner, with our friends, if we're continually not being honest and not being transparent.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a great point. And with that first part of of this conversation, which is you said we do a good job of kind of bringing our worries and our concerns to God. What do you think is limiting us, or is a barrier to us listening from God? Like if we can apply that principle to our human, relationships with each other, do you see similar patterns in how we relate to God? Like what makes it hard for us to hear from God, do you think?
Yeah. I think, like as people, we're just not very good listeners. I think that is
Right.
a
That's
skill that a
true.
lot of us really have to work hard on. And some people choose not to really work hard on it.
Mm.
I think about a lot of the relational work that I do. Especially if we're in conflict or we're in distress, we are talking at someone. And when it is their turn to talk, are we really listening or are we
Mm.
coming up with what we want to say back, our rebuttal? Are we thinking about, yeah, just our response, or are we really focused on hearing them?
Yeah.
that totally comes up in our real life. And so I think we're just not well practiced at good listening, active listening. And so I think that even with God, again, because most of us don't hear an audible voice, right? Most of us
Mhm.
will be like a stirring in our spirit or words being illuminated to us, or maybe even like visions or dreams. So like, are we staying quiet? Are we doing the like,
Mm.
speak, Lord, your servant is listening, and then going quiet? What's the Bible verse? I'm not the best at quoting these things,
Mhm.
but God is a whisper. He is not a thunderstorm. And so we really do need to stay still and seek him. And I think we're just not very good at that.
Yeah, yeah, not good at also maybe clearing our heads from those worries or maybe not getting the response that we want. And that
Mm,
creates some of that noise or that barrier in being able to hear from God. Like, no, I don't think you're
totally.
saying that, right?
Totally.
Kind of like how we misinterpret each other, right? Like,
Mhm.
well, you really meant this. No, no, I didn't mean that. I meant this, right? So there's
Yes.
this inaction uh conversation where we're trying to gain clarity. But with
Mhm.
God, it's not like that.
Mhm.
But when we are speaking to God about our problems, it seems to be one of the things, at least it seems to be that we're not hearing what we want to hear. So we're saying, "Are you sure you mean that?" And we're asking for more clarification. But yeah, I mean, is that something that you're kind of referring to as in not being able to hear from God because I'm not hearing what I want to hear, and I think that you're wanting to say something else, and we're looking kind of for confirmation bias where we want
I
God
think
to agree.
so.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure that's true. But I think, I mean, I don't know. What do you think, Sam? I also think like I know a lot of people in my life, not necessarily clients, because I don't get into a whole lot of like prayer topics or like specifics
Mhm.
there, but at least personally, that, people will petition God and kind of put their prayers, put their requests out there, and then they go about their day.
Yeah.
Like how much like t time are we like truly just spending in quiet, like spending in stillness?
Yeah.
Right? Like we're going back to like human practices in our culture today that are just difficult to
Mm.
just sit there and be still and not pick up our phone, not run on to the next thing, not answer the next email, but just gives God some time to respond.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe that's the other part of it too, this idea of being still. Because
Hmm.
in conversation, we could make that argument as well that we don't know how to be still or maybe be in the quiet or in that tension of waiting,
Hmm.
right? We don't
Hmm.
like to wait. And yeah, I feel like that could be a potential barrier as well, where I don't want to wait. I want an answer right away. And some of these things take time. Most of them take time, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I do see that as another potential barrier. You mentioned honesty.
Hmm.
And you said, it's not like we're hiding anything from God, but why do you think it's difficult for us to share those things that God already knows? Similar to
Hmm.
relationships, my fear is if I share this, I'm going to be pushed away.
Hmm.
I'm going to be unwanted.
Hmm.
Uh, I'm going to be hurt. They're going to hurt me now.
Yep.
Yeah. Why do you think it's hard for us as believers to share those dark things that God knows? Um, but we try to hide in a sense, I guess.
Hmm. I mean, the first thing that I think comes up a lot for people is just shame. I think that
Yeah.
shame is a really powerful emotion that, again, like we know God knows like every corner of our heart. But when we say it out loud or when we, bring it to God in prayer, it is like admitting, like, yes, I've done this thing, or yes, I've had these thoughts, or yes, I'm struggling in this way. And it's
Mm,
hard to admit to ourselves, let alone, like our creator. And again, like we see that in relationships so often where like someone is struggling with something, someone's made a huge mistake, and there's just too much shame to allow them to be
mm,
honest and bring it to, again, like their partner or their family member, or whatever the case might be.
hmm. And how do you guide that person to eventually share what they've been keeping a secret?
Hmm. Yeah, I do a little bit of education, honestly, on the difference between shame and guilt. So, guilt is I feel bad, I feel guilty because I did something wrong, like I did
Hmm.
something that I shouldn't have. Um, Shame is I am a bad person, I am wrong, right? So, the difference of like the looking at the action versus the person. A mistake doesn't define a person. A mistake is just a
Mm,
mistake. and helping people separate those two, I think is really powerful.
Yeah. So when people make mistakes, at least from what you've seen in your experience, do you see that the hurt partner makes that their whole identity of the other person? Like, yeah, you made this big mistake and it really hurt and you've messed up. I can't trust you anymore, type of thing.
Mhm.
So how do you help the other person start to work through those feelings as well? So they have been hurt. The person is
Mhm.
acknowledging it. How do you help the other person kind of work through, hey, there's forgiveness or yeah, I mean, just what does that process look like?
Yeah, I think it's exactly moving to that is like acknowledging that it was a hurt and we're not trying to ignore it by any means or minimize it. Like it is what it is, and we need to validate that experience and that hurt. But what good is it to continue to hold on to it? Like how is that benefiting the relationship? I think a lot of people, this whole like forgive and forget thing was a
Mm,
mantra for a really long time. And I think that that has kept people from forgiving because they're like, I don't think this person deserves for me to forget. And I think that there is like this new education or like this new wave of acceptance that like I can forgive you and I don't have to forget, right? I can
mhm.
forgive you and maintain boundaries in my life. And I think that's a really important difference.
Yeah, yeah. I'm thinking about how those same behaviors or the way in which you communicate kind of relates to our relationship with God.
Hmm.
And I guess one of the key distinctions that we can make, which is more obvious than not, is that God is not like us, that He doesn't push us away when we're trying to communicate something. In fact, He welcomes it. I was just reading
Yeah.
Genesis 3, right? The whole Garden of Eden thing. When they eat of the fruit, they hide. God comes, walks into the
Hmm.
garden, says, "Where are you?" Right? He's seeking them out, and He knows what happened. But he's
Hmm.
asking, it's like this bid for connection, right? It's like, where
Yes.
are you, right? What's going on? And eventually they do share, but we
Mhm.
find something that we see obviously also in communication or in relationships is the passing off of responsibility. Well, it wasn't
Hmm.
me, it was the wife you gave me. No, it wasn't me, it was the serpent, and so on. So even
Hmm.
that element of taking responsibility seems to fall into place in communication patterns as well. Is that
Absolutely.
if you don't take responsibility for what you did, then are you truly repentant about what happened, right?
Yeah.
Um, and
Well, and can you truly repent? I would even add, like, are you able to truly repent if you're not taking full accountability for your actions?
Right, right. And then what does that look like? Who determines
Mhm.
what that accountability looks like, right? Because the healing for the offended party, they might say, "Well, I need this." Is it that person who determines what the healing process can look like, or do you work with the couple together to create those goals? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, it makes me think of again like so many parallels that I feel like I didn't even realize until we're talking about it. But like
Mm.
taking accountability and forgiveness, like it requires a lot of repentance, right? Like repentance is asking for forgiveness from God, but then turning away from the sin. Like
Mm.
we can't be repenting if we're asking for forgiveness, but then continuing to engage in the same behavior, right? That's not repenting. And so
Yeah.
it's the same thing in a relationship or, what any kind of relationship the taking the accountability and then saying, and these are the changes that I'm going to make. These are the steps that I'm going to do that will be different so that I don't continue to make this mistake.
Hmm. Yes. And those mistakes, yeah, to your point, we do bring those things up to God and we do share those things openly with God and He does forgive us. And I often try to think about prayer, right? When we use prayer, it seems one-sided. You've talked about kind of remaining, having this ability to remain silent and slowly hearing for the Lord. And I think sometimes, and I don't know what your thoughts on this are, but it takes time to tune in to how God is speaking to us. Usually
Mhm.
when we do something an offense against God, we want to pull away, right? I think that's kind of one of the ways in
Mhm.
which Satan tries to lure us away. It's like God doesn't want anything to do with you right now, right? This also
Totally.
happens in relationships. They don't want anything to do with you. Just stay away. Don't talk to them. You got to go take care of your stuff before you even try to reconcile, right?
Totally.
And in our relationship with God, it's kind of the same thing where it's like if I don't correct this, then I don't have the privilege to even get close to God. So I need to keep my distance
Mhm.
and that then breeds more shame and more shame and more distance and more distance. So I
Yes.
think one of the communication, I guess, principles that can come up is, and I think this happens in couples too, is always keep talking, right? There's this
Mm,
idea of continue to seek ways to talk. Now, I don't know if that's going to be helpful in person to person relationships, like whether it be romantic relationship or friendships, but in our relationship with God, I wonder if that's one of the antidotes to that distance or to that shame is that we see God's behaviors to pursue and to connect with us, and for us it's to kind of retreat. So the antidote to that is seek God. He's seeking you out. He says, "Seek me, and you will find me." Right?
hmm
And
hmm
so I think that's one of those ways of communicating with God is continue to seek Him out. And the way that you do that is through prayer, even though
Yeah.
you don't feel close, right?
Yes.
And I can imagine couples when they're going through that process of restoration, uh, is that they don't feel close to them because they're still in
Yeah.
those early stages of trying to rebuild that bridge, right?
Totally.
Yeah,
Right.
is there anything that you see there along the rebuilding of trust in a sense of
hmm
when one person hurts another, they don't feel close to them even though they're doing the thing, right? They're doing the
hmm
work, but they still don't
hmm
feel close to the other person. What's missing?
hmm hmm Well, I mean, I think how I advise clients in that situation, because first of all, sometimes when there is like the offense or the breakage in a relationship, they'll be like, well, they need to start, right? Like they need to
Mm,
start whatever, greeting me more affectionately. They need to start initiating intimacy. And it's like taking that accountability of like, we do need to start the behaviors of the type of relationship we want to have, right? So if you want more intimacy, even if you feel like it's your partner's responsibility at this point in the relationship, like you just have to take responsibility for it and like start creating that relationship you desire.
mhm,
Um, and so I think that is a really important piece because we can't always trust our feelings. And I think
mm,
that's honestly like a monumental principle in work that I do with a person is
mhm,
that just like we can't trust every thought that we think, we can't trust every feeling that we have. We can, again, acknowledge it and validate it, but it might not be true. Like sometimes our feelings do misguide us. So we might feel, I don't have a lot of love for my spouse, or I don't have a lot of love for this relationship. But if you want it, you can
mhm.
still act in a way without the feeling. You don't have, it's not a prerequisite to feel it.
Yeah. Oh, no, I love that. That's actually a really great point because I think in modern culture, I think the feelings are often overemphasized
hmm
and the maybe commitment or the working through things is not emphasized as much. And I don't know if you've
Totally.
seen that in your practice, but it's almost like personal happiness is above everything else. And if that
hmm
was the case in our relationship with the Lord, then gosh, I can't even imagine how many times that I would, leave the Lord or want to be away from him if my personal happiness was the apex of my life fulfillment, you know? Um,
Totally.
yeah, I can't even imagine that. You'll appreciate this. One famous author, I used to read a lot of his books. His name is Dr. Larry Crabb. He said that he was counseling a man who came into his office and he was a Christian man and he was going through a really hard time and he's like, I've been feeling really sad and I don't know, I don't know what to do, but I want to feel excited. I want to feel happy. I want to feel good. And he's like, okay.
hmm
So what have you done so far? He's like, oh, nothing. I just know that that's how I want to feel. He's like, okay. And let me give you a couple of tips here. And Dr. Crab goes, I want you to buy a cruise ticket. I want you to get a 7 day, we make it a 7 day cruise. And when you go on that cruise, just party all night long, drink all that you want, meet as many women as you want, and then come back and you'll be happy. And the client looks at him, he's like, wait a minute, aren't you a Christian counselor? He's like, yeah. And he says, well, what kind of advice is this? I don't want, this doesn't sound like Christian advice. And Dr. Rab goes, well, you said you wanted to be happy. And, happiness is temporary. So you'll feel happy.
hmm
But if you want the joy of the Lord, that's going to require for you to go through this process of suffering so you can know what joy looks like at the end of it.
Mm,
And I was like, man, it's so true, right? It's this idea of
so
we
true.
can't experience joy unless we know what the pain of going through that
Mm,
process looks like. And I
hmm.
think in our relationship with the Lord, sometimes we can get frustrated when we're going through things and we're blaming the Lord and saying,
Yes.
Lord, why did you allow this to happen? That's the big question, right? Why this? Why me? Um, and then realizing that part of that journey is to draw closer to the Lord. And maybe similar
Yes.
to relationships, having those hard conversations is part of intimacy and closeness, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like maybe a lot of couples don't want to have those tough conversations, which robs them of the
Hmm.
intimacy that they can potentially experience. Am I right with that?
Totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I think you're spot on there. The other thing I was thinking too, when you were talking about like learning the ways that the Lord communicates with you, we're
Mhm.
talking about communication styles, right? Like, which is really important because the Lord does speak to all of us differently based
Yeah.
on our unique giftings and the way He's created us. And I think that that is such an overlooked point in relationships as well, is that
Mm,
your partner or the person in front of you communicates differently than you do. Like, they are not the same
that's a
as
good point.
you. And I feel like you hear this so often, right? When a couple will be like, well, I would never do that. I would never react that way. And it's like, yeah, but that doesn't mean your partner doesn't and might mean something different through their actions. And
Mm,
so really learning how to understand, again, partner relationship that those close to you, understand their communication styles. Because just because you would or wouldn't do something, they're a different person and they communicate differently. So really seeing it from their perspective, trying to really understand and learn the way that they do things,
mm,
just like our relationship with the Lord will create more fruit, more fruitful relationships for a person.
yeah, yeah. And kind of going back to maybe our original point that, communication is about trying to understand where the
Hmm.
other person is coming from. And it's asking questions, it's digging deeper, really trying to get into the way that they think about things and feel about things. And I've seen this a lot, Maggie, um, where Christians expect to know God without actually trying to know God, which means
Hmm.
whether it be um, going to church, whether it be reading their Bibles, whether it be praying, being around Christian community, other believers who can encourage them in their walk, they
Hmm.
don't do those things. And not to be performative, this is just the requirement of getting to know someone, is that
Totally.
we are intentional about seeking him out through his
Yeah.
word. So I don't know what the Lord thinks about something if I'm not reading his word. Lord, what do you
Hmm.
think about this?
Hmm.
How do you feel about this? How can you guide me in this? And it's
Hmm.
asking those questions, but also going to his word. And I think sometimes Christians just pray and just expect for something to just fall in their lap,
Yeah.
or which is usually some form of confirmation bias,
Hmm.
where they're looking for a specific answer, and if it aligns with what they want, they say, "Oh, this must be from the Lord."
Yeah.
And sometimes that can take people down a wrong path. And I've seen that in relationships where, again, if happiness is the primary concern, then they're going
Hmm.
to do what makes them happy. And the argument is, well, God wants me to be happy, you know.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, me and I don't know if you've seen the other podcast I've done with my friend Tim. It's called Psych and Theo.
Oh,
But
I haven't.
yeah, we had a episode where we did, Does God want me to be happy? Right.
Mm.
And it was that whole idea of, like anything, yeah, I want the person that I love to be happy, but I
Right.
know that if I make that the goal, the times that they're not happy, what does that mean about the relationship? You know? And it's really about who is sticking through the difficult times with you, where that bond is forged stronger and it's strengthened, right? So yeah, I really think we miss a lot by not communicating these fears or things that we have going on in our lives with each other and with the Lord. Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and what you just said, I mean, that makes me think of boundaries, right? Like if we are over so concerned with happiness and making our the person we're in relationship with happy, we are going to do a lot of stuff that we probably shouldn't do, right? Because happiness isn't
Mm,
ultimately the goal of every moment of life. So
yeah.
how much are we going to overextend ourselves and do and yeah, just kind of push our boundaries. And we know that the Lord is a Lord of boundaries. We know the Lord is a Lord of, no or not yet.
Mm.
And so yeah, that totally stood out to me. That's an interesting point.
Yeah, yeah. So if they can't hear a no or a not yet, if everything's a yes,
Hmm.
then it might just be them yes and them, saying yes to themselves and not hearing or being aware of those, not listening
Yeah,
clearly or enough.
totally.
Now, just to be clear, for those who are listening, we're not saying that you're not listening from the Lord if you've been getting yeses, right?
Sure.
What we're saying is be open to the no's and the not yets because that's often a big part of this boundaries. Like boundaries are intended to protect us. They're
Yes.
intended to keep us in relationship. Like there's boundaries that are set in marriage, that are set in friendships to protect that relationship.
Right.
And similarly, in our relationship with God, we can very, very easily get caught up in all the busyness of life and forget about God in the process and say, well, I'm too busy. I can't do that because, I have my family, I have my kids, I have all these things. And again, very easy to not put boundaries around our relationship with God, right?
Yes.
And yeah, so that really did stand out to me as well. Maggie, are there some principles that you also encourage just in relationships in general? So we talked about a couple of them. It's a two-way
Hmm.
street. We
Hmm.
talked about being honest, right, and
Hmm.
sharing everything. And vulnerability is maybe another one as well.
Hmm.
Are there some other things that are coming up for you as you think about communication patterns or principles?
Yeah, I think we also talked about listening, how that's a really important one.
Yeah.
I think the use of I statements, right? Like I think we mentioned that a little bit in the last podcast, but it's so important to not be, telling someone else how they feel or like what their intentions were, but sticking with like, again, being authentic, being honest with. And sometimes that's hard, right? Because we have to actually share how we felt. I felt hurt when you did that. I feel embarrassed when you do that. Sometimes it's just easier to be like, you're crazy when you do that and, put it off
Mm,
on others. So again, taking accountability, taking ownership for our feelings and making sure we're communicating those.
yeah. And how do you get that for both people in that relationship to use the I statements? I feel like it's a hard thing to do, obviously,
Hmm.
for people. I'm remembering this show where have you seen it where there's this therapist and she's like she's doing a couples counseling session
Okay.
and she starts asking the husband something about the wife and he says, well, I did this and I did apologize about that. And she just starts laying it on him. And
Mm-hmm.
the therapist stops her and says, hey, why are you just attacking him right now? What's going on here? And she's like, well, he's just he doesn't really mean that and this and speaking to your point, like she was putting words in his mouth and saying,
Yeah.
no, he doesn't really mean that and this and that. And so she was just trying to get to the core root of it.
Hmm.
But yeah, I feel like often these misunderstandings, they stem from somewhere. They
Mm.
stem from previous experiences with that person that make
Yeah.
them believe those things about them, right?
Yeah.
And I think for us as Christians, there may be experiences that you've had in church or with other Christians that maybe
Hmm.
shape your view of God and shape how you relate to God. For
Yeah.
example, well, Sam, if I pray, God's not going to answer my prayer. Okay, well, what's the evidence for that? I'd say, well, I pray that He would heal my daughter. I pray that He would heal my marriage, and that didn't happen. So God doesn't really answer prayers, right?
Mm.
So that communication pattern or practice, to them, it's not going to make a lot of sense, but it doesn't
Hmm.
make sense because they didn't get the result or the result that they wanted. And I
Yeah.
think that can also be a barrier to communicating with God too when we don't get what we wanted in a
Yeah,
sense,
absolutely.
you know.
Yeah, when prayers go unanswered.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And so there's so much to say even about that, how we talk to God about the things that we need and how we talk to God about the things that we want as well.
Hmm.
And yeah, I guess if we could shift the conversation just a little bit, it would be what's the biggest thing that you've learned about how God communicates with us as his children? You know, Maggie, I don't think I've asked you. Do you have kids?
I don't have children,
No?
no.
Okay. I was gonna ask, so even well, even with your parents, right? How do
Hmm.
your parents communicate with you in a way that's made you feel loved and cared for? Because if we think about communication pattern, communicating with God, I mean,
Hmm.
He's our Father, right? Father
Hmm.
to daughter, father to son. So He communicates to us as a father would.
Right.
But yeah, so what are some things that you've seen in your maybe your own relationship with your parents or in other people's relationships, healthy communication patterns between parents with their children?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I think probably like most people, it's easier to think of the unhealthy. And thank God,
Mm.
have like very healthy parents who are still married and, there's lots of very good things. But my mind immediately will go to, yeah, but they didn't do this or this
Right.
wasn't, and I just wanted to say that out loud to like normalize for people because,
Mm.
I think that as parents, like people do the very best that they can with the information that they have. And that doesn't mean they're not going to make mistakes and that we're going to grow up and wish things were a little bit different. Sometimes I work with parents that are like, I don't want to mess up my kid. And they get
Mm.
really anxious about it, actually, like really stressed and overwhelmed. And I just encourage them, like, you can only do the very best that you can do. And mistakes are inevitable, and children are going to develop just the way that they're supposed to and can look back and learn, right? How many of us do things differently now because we learned from the mistakes of those before us. So I think even that, like, God can redeem, of course.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think something that my parents did really well, and even thinking about attachment is like where my mind goes as we start thinking about like patterns of behavior,
Hmm.
is that, again, like thank God my dad worked full time and my mom was able to stay home with us. So
Hmm.
I feel like we were able to have like a very strong primary attachment caregiver throughout my entire life. Like
That's
I
awesome.
remember even being in middle school, in high school, if I called my mom in the middle of the day to ask her a question or to ask her to drop off my lunch or something like that, like she was available and able to do that. So I think throughout my life, I did learn, again, that secure attachment lens of, the world is safe, I'm important, really
Mm.
kind of healthy behavior, healthy mindsets and behavior patterns like that.
Yeah. So like no matter what I'm going through, I know my mom's gonna be able to, I can call my mom, she'll be there. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. That,
which
that
is
that's
really
established.
beautiful.
Yeah, it does establish a sense of security. Like I can go to my mom, whenever something happens. And that's
Hmm.
really where we start to see, I guess, our communication patterns, not just with other people, but with God, is that
Hmm.
when this stress happens, who do you turn to during that time?
Hmm.
And yeah, I mean, I went through something a couple of years ago, and you start to realize that you do have people around you that care about you, that love you, but they can't be with you all of the time.
Right.
So it sometimes it felt lonely, and then other times though it was just like, well, they can't be here, but God's here.
Hmm.
So let me pray to God and just see
Hmm.
kind of what happens. So through that difficulty, it
Hmm.
really started to strengthen my relationship with God because it made me realize that He was there, He was listening. And
Totally.
even though at that moment, maybe it's just that calm silence of just presence where it felt comforting to
Mm.
just sense that presence there
Hmm.
during difficult times. And I think, speaking of communication, that sometimes the communication is that. It
Hmm.
is either a calm presence or even just the silence of there's nothing really to say here. It's just
Hmm.
I want to hear you out type of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And it did feel like that. And I'm not used to or wasn't used to sharing what I was feeling, maybe what I was thinking, but not really the feeling parts.
Sure.
And it's hard to share feelings when people don't know how to respond to them, right?
Yeah.
If I were to share that I'm sad and someone's like, "You're sad about that?" It's like, "Oh, I'm not going to share that anymore." But
Totally.
the security that I felt in just sharing with God about what I was experiencing and what I was thinking, it
Yeah.
really provided yeah, again, a source of comfort. So the more experiences you have of these difficult moments that push you towards God, you really want to dig into that, right? And
Hmm.
so there's prayer, then it's reading God's word, and then
Yeah.
community, how much community speaks to you as well. But
Hmm.
I love what you shared there, Maggie, about your mom and how she was present and available to you guys when you needed her.
Hmm.
Um, in some ways, and you can correct me if I'm wrong with this, in some ways, I feel like grown-ups who had good parents, sometimes they feel guilty or bad when they're interacting with someone who didn't have that. because
Mm.
it's like, well, I had good parents. And if I share with you about how good my parents were with me, I feel like I'm not paying attention to your experience, or I don't really understand what you're going through because I didn't have bad parents. Is that a feeling for you maybe when you've experienced with clients, or am I reading too much into that?
I can totally track that, and I definitely see how that can be really valid for a lot of people. I think that I've just honestly done a lot of my own personal work, and I can just like very much like separate the fact that like I can't take on your burdens
Mm,
for like myself personally. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
they're just too separate, right? And of course, in a client session, like I don't share about my parents, and I would
Hmm.
never bring that up. But yeah, I can hold both. Both
Yeah.
can be true. That like your suffering is very valid, and the fact that I had healthy parents is separate from that. So I don't hold guilt. I know I like I said, I can
Mm,
totally track how people will
mhm.
or could. It's the same thing with survivor's guilt, right? Like I can totally understand how that
Mm,
exists for people. But again, it probably is like my faith in the Lord of like I just trust what he's doing, and like he created my life on purpose for a purpose, and like so I just have to cling to that.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, Gosh, I really, again, this is just going to get me thinking a lot about just how I communicate with God in general. But
Yeah.
um, I'm tying it just to all of these moments, and there seems to always be like this type of suffering or low moment that really reemphasized or reinforced my trust and faith in God. And
Mm.
just for those who are out there who are maybe having a hard time in their relationship, it could be communication, it could be intimacy, it could be frustrations, finances, whatever the case is. It almost seems, Maggie, as though that difficulty can be seen as an opportunity to communicate more
Mm.
and maybe even grow in the relationship. Um, I don't know if it would be fair or maybe right to say that you need suffering to be closer, but it seems pretty common that the
Hmm.
suffering, seems to sharpen or enhance the relationship in a way.
I mean, that makes me think of post-traumatic growth, right? It's like we are all going to suffer. Suffering is inevitable. None of us are going to escape that. So, what do we do with it? Like, do we just decide it's going to make our life worse and continue to go downhill? Or do we view it as like that form of acceptance, right? Moving into acceptance to say, this happened. What can I learn from it? How can
Mhm.
I grow from it? How can I do better in the world because of my suffering? That's post-traumatic growth. And that does help a lot of people work through horrible things that they've been through.
Hmm. And if they're being supportive of each other in that process, that provides growth for both people.
Yeah, it could. I was thinking of it as an individual, but yeah, I could
Okay.
see that. If like a family, had a tragic loss or something like that. I mean, we know that the statistics are that that often will break up a relationship when, a couple,
Mm,
let's say, has experienced a loss together. But again, if the couple is able to say, how can we together grow from this, do something with this, right? That's why a lot of people, start foundations or something like that in honor of deceased folks or losses that have occurred because we need to do something with that.
yeah.
And if we are, blessing others, making the world a better place, that helps us heal, that helps us really move through trauma.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. I guess I was thinking about how if when there is a trauma or something that happens within the family or within the
Mhm.
marriage, if you see one that grows and the other one doesn't, or do you usually see
Mm.
both people growing because of that tribulation or struggle?
Yeah. Hmm. I don't know what I see more of. That's not kind of hard. I would really have to think about that actually. I mean, of course, like I think objectively we can say that if one person is growing and moving in one direction and the other person is not, like that is, where we see breakages in relationships.
Hmm.
Of course, like anything could be healed if both people want it to, but sometimes people do determine we just need to kind of go different directions or we want new things after a big life circumstance. And sometimes that's not always bad. Sometimes it is okay to say, again, thinking about like friendships, even like sometimes friendships go through hard times. It's okay afterwards to say, like, hey, we're going to probably go our separate ways from this. We want different things. I don't think that's always a negative thing, but that would be hard for a relationship to maintain if we have different goals.
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've seen definitely a lot of different friendships and relationships where, yeah, sometimes the goals you're just taking you in different directions, and that's just
Yeah.
part of the reality.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess to kind of wrap up our conversation here with communication is I guess the takeaway is to always be communicating with God,
Hmm.
to be patient in the waiting and listening
Hmm.
for his voice,
Hmm.
continue seeking community, Christian community, so you can hear maybe different people have, this is a big part. I think that was part of just anyone's growth is when you hear other people who have gone through similar experiences or who've gone through their own difficulties. Like we were able to learn from their what they share. So seeking out
Absolutely.
Christian community is super helpful as well. And then just always remaining in the word and praying. All of those are key practical ways of just communicating with God. And
Hmm.
again, those same principles we can then take over into our relationships where, yeah, seek community, seek the encouragement of other, couples and believers to encourage you in your walk, in your relationship.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, just always staying connected in a sense and keeping yourself
Absolutely.
open. Yeah.
Yeah. If I could just say one more thing, Sam, because when you were talking about, I don't know if it was when you were growing up or later in life, but maybe feeling like, okay, who do I talk to? What do I do?
Mm.
And being able to turn to God and strengthening your relationship with Him through a difficult season. It really made me think of, again, like thinking of attachment styles, your specialty and expertise, but if we have, just for simplicity's sake, secure and insecure attachment styles, it's kind of hard. I don't know if you found this, but it is hard for people to heal attachment wounds just because they typically do start when they're so young. And I really feel like when you were saying this, I feel like the people who have the most success in healing an attachment wound and developing secure attachment are the ones who have a spiritual faith. And whether they,
Mm.
call that like God and Christianity, or I have clients that just, call it like divine spirit or, something else.
Mm.
But like I can think of one client particularly who suffers quite a great deal because of his very insecure attachment because of early childhood trauma. And really the one thing that we're able to hold on to is like his belief in something bigger and a higher
Mhm.
power, and being able to speak to this higher power when he does feel totally alone, and when he is like, I don't know how to reach out to friends, I don't know how to maintain a healthy relationship. At least I have my higher power that is always with me and never leaves me, and I can
Mm.
share my burdens with my higher power, and I can, wait and hear for my higher power's response and guidance. And I mean, that's like, I don't know if I honestly ever like really connected that until you were saying that, of like how healing our relationship with God can be,
Yeah.
even when it comes to this, attachment and our insecure attachment.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, that's very evident in the research that people who have any type of religious attachment or religious figure in their mind is that can be, it's a coping skill. It's a way to cope
Hmm.
with the difficulties of life, something outside of themselves that gives them the
Hmm.
strength. We have the blessing as Christians to know Jesus and to walk with him and to see it modeled throughout Scripture.
Hmm.
And so that's a huge blessing for us. But yeah, I mean, people who have some form of faith or some form of connection to a religion, there's principles within certain religions that for them they find helpful. And
Hmm.
when there is no one around, this seems to be that faith and religion for a lot of people is one of the grounding um, beliefs or coping skills that they have. Um,
Totally.
but yeah, I mean, the ideal is always that you have a good support system, that you have a faith, and that
Hmm.
you are well connected with your family as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, and the more ruptures that we experience in relationships, what you always want to see is the repair piece, which is, does this person still want to connect with me? Right. So that connection is sought out by reaching out. It can be physical touch, it can be communicating. I mean, because of our topic today, it's just, does the person still want to talk to me?
Yeah.
Everyone goes through the silent treatment piece,
Yeah.
but if you can limit that, I think there was some new research that said if people can talk about their problem within 20 minutes after the after it was presented. So if we had an
Hmm.
argument within 20 minutes, can they come back? after they've calmed down, come back and try to resolve it, then like it shows higher success rates of future problem solving as
Oh,
well.
wow.
Yeah. Now there's other research that says, well, you need to cool down, kind of like the don't go to sleep, don't go to bed angry thing, right?
Yeah.
There was someone who they did a research where it was actually better for people to go to sleep angry because their nervous system slowly starts to regulate. They fall
Yeah.
asleep, they wake up, and you want to talk about it first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit mixed, but in general, the idea is that there is repair, that there is communication after the ruptures.
So good. Yeah, for sure.
So,
Look at how many of these like common mantras we're debunking right now, Sam. I feel like
right.
that should be like a takeaway for the listeners. If you have a common mantra that like you've always said, maybe challenge it because it might not be
Yes.
true.
Exactly. Exactly. No, this is great. This is great. I love how this conversation came up, Maggie. I love that it was a topic that we're covering. And yeah, I'm looking forward to releasing these episodes. Again, if you're listening to this one, the one prior to this one was on healthy communication within relationships. And this topic was more about how does all this relate to our relationship with God and how we understand each other and so on. So,
Yeah.
guys, thank you for tuning in. Maggie, thank you for coming on the show again. I really appreciate your insights and just being able to just converse. Today was really a good conversation just about the things that we're learning, communication, relationships, and so on, and how that relates to God. So thank you again, Maggie.
Yes, of course. I hope it blesses a lot of people. It definitely blessed me, Sam. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. I'm sure it will. I'm sure it will. All right, guys. Well, I'll see you next time. Take care.